And really like the epitome of the perfect person, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, good call out. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was, well, Dane was just saying like when he brought up morals. I feel like I told my group this where I was like going through the like in part two of the document. Lists like like I think like around 40 of them of things like you should not do. So remind me of like the Ten Commandments. Like one should not steal, one should not kill, one should like bribe stuff like that. It's literally like a extended version of it. Like you should not kill, you should not like steal, all that stuff. So it can remind me of like morals and stuff like that. What Dwayne said.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually called, the book is called Ma'at, the Moral Idea in Ancient Egypt. Give me 1 second. Yo, Alan, stop texting me, please. It's coming to my screen. All right. So the text is actually called the Moral Idea. So for Dwayne and Mark to actually pick up on this idea of morals, you're spot on, right? So kind of let me get into what I found of interest. One thing that you guys didn't get is the introduction, and in the introduction, he kind of lays out what his desire is for the text. How many of you guys are familiar with the holiday Kwanzaa? Heard of Kwanzaa before? Okay, so the individual who wrote this book is the inventor of Kwanzaa. So at Cal State Long Beach, the chair of their department is Maulanga Karenga, which is the individual who invented Kwanzaa and who is the individual who wrote this text. So we're not too far removed from this information and the individual who wrote this information. But this is how he starts off the introduction of the book. The essential thrust and purpose of this work is to delineate and critically examine Ma'at, the moral idea of ancient Egypt or Kemet, using the declarations of innocence in the New Kingdom text, the book coming forth by day and night, and other key ethical texts as the fundamental foci. And foci just means focus, right? It's the fundamental foci or analysis in the process. Explore the usefulness of Ma'atan critical thought as a resource for modern moral discourse and the philosophic reflection on critical moral issues, right? So his desire in this text is just to investigate this idea of Ma'at, right? And the moral issue and the critical moral issues that this idea of Ma'at brings to the fore, right? Um, Another thing that the book talks about, or the reading talks about very in the opening paragraph, right? This idea of elasticity and the ma'at and the concept of being ma'at, being elastic. What do you think the author means by the elasticity of this idea of ma'at?
I think it actually means that it's very broad in the spec that can be determined even in these times. We even found some similarities to today's society. So I feel like it's a very broad scope, but it's very specific in the time and the environment you are in. So it's very broad, but then it becomes very specific.
Yeah. So Claudia, she hit it right on the head, right? If you think about what elastic does, it's meant to stretch and be bent and be molded and shaped, right? So that speaks to the broadness of this concept or this ideal of ma'at. But at the same time, there's a specificity to this ideal as well, right? It's very specified in the way it wants you to behave, in the way that it wants you to show up in life as a human being, right? So I'll read a quick passage. Actually, this conceptual elasticity, which at first glance might seem problematic, on deeper inquiry proves promising due to what Morenz calls Ma'at's rich treasury of meaning. So one thing I kind of want to make my portion also like a tutorial, if you will, on how to engage these very dense, very philosophically loaded terminology text, right? Also, what's very distracting in this writing is the way that the text is cited, right? So I believe the author is using like APA formatting. So you'll see like the last name within the brackets in a year, right? What that indicates is the author that he's pulling the information from, the year that the text was written, and then the page number that the text was pulled from, right? So if you're reading this, it seems it seems confusing, and it also breaks up the flow of the writing, because as you're reading, you have to deal with all these last names and dates and pages, right? But kind of as a reader, just know what that is and kind of skim over that, right? That's not the material that you're looking for. He's just telling you where he got this information from, right? So if I were to read this sentence again, states, actually, this conceptual elasticity, which at first glance might seem problematic. So essentially what they're saying is, so at first, the ability for it to be broad may seem like a problem, right? But then it says, on deeper inquiry, proves promising due to what Morin's, and then in parentheses, right, 1984, comma 16. So we know that the book that he's referring to was written in 1984. The page number for this quote was on page 16, and he calls Ma'at a rich treasury of meaning in the quotation marks, right? So we know as readers what's in quotation marks is being pulled from Morin's 1984, page 16, right? Says, for here, one encounters in Ma'at with Kua, again, another author. This time the text is written in 1978. The page is 138. And what Kua defines as pluralization, right? So the ability to be plural, right? The ability to have multiple meanings, which allows for and encourages wide a range of thoughts and interpretations, right? So why is this important? And if you think about what you read after the initial paragraph, he's telling you already that there's various interpretations of what Ma'at is. There's various ways to define this notion or this concept of Ma'at, right? So he just kind of letting you know this from jump. And then as you work your way further into the text, she provides you examples of the varying definitions, right? So this is on page 6, the start of the first whole paragraph, right? So again, I don't know if y'all can see that. So we're starting here on page 6. He's going to give us somewhat of an etymological definition of Ma'at. And etymology, right? I don't know how many of y'all looked this up, but it only means what the word breaks down to, right? What is the word's origin? By definition, tracing the words and the terms back to its origin, right? So the etymology of Ma'at, and it gives you the Ma'at in its hieroglyphs or in its netter and the symbols, right? Suggests an evolution from a physical concept of straightness, evenness, levelness, correctness, as the wedge-shaped glyph suggests. So just saying as that the hieroglyph that's kind of shaped like that, that's what that is suggesting, right? To a general concept of rightness, including the ontological and ethical sense of truth, justice, righteousness, order, in a word, the rightness of things, right? So this essentially is telling us that Ma'at shift, right, from a physical concept of being straight. So like a ruler would be considered myotic because it's straight, right? So it shifted from that to being more of a ontological and ethical sense of being truth, justice, righteousness, and what was the other one? Righteousness of things. So things being righteous, right? So this paragraph is telling you that there was a shift that took place in how Ma'at was understood, right? Originally being understood as a physical concept for being straight, to being a more of a philosophical or ontological understanding of being righteous, living a righteous way. What we understand in the Christian tradition of walking the straight and narrow path, right? The same thing. It's kind of the same. So we'll pass that. It's the same central issue. So then here's another way of understanding or interpreting Ma'at, right? And this is on page 8, the second full paragraph there on page 8. Ma'at as a principle and force constitutive of creation itself, right? So they're saying that Ma'at could also be understood as the force of creation itself, right? The force that makes things come into being, right? Comes to mean then an order of rightness which permeates existence and gives life. So it's an order of rightness that creates life to be manifest, right? Creates life to come into being. Thus, so another author that we're dealing with, or another thinker that we're dealing with, Siegfried Morenz, and this is from the same book in 1984, page 113, states that Ma'at is right order in nature and society, as established by the act of creation, and hence means, according to context, what is right, what is correct, law, order, justice, and truth, right? Athens, written in 1954 on page 23, also stresses the centrality of Ma'at as a divinely constituted order, right? So also, this is an order that can be constituted. Think about what the Constitution does, right? It places order on society. So they're arguing in this passage that Ma'at could also be understood as a way of constituting and ordering and shaping society, okay? Last passage I'll deal with, and then we'll kind of discuss in a little bit on how the Comedics understood Ma'at to play out in real time as it relates to the afterlife, right? So he says, this is on page 10, again, the first full paragraph, starting here. The key point of this discussion, then, is that the practice of Ma'at is conceived and carried out within the worldview which links the divine, the natural, and the social. Okay, so that's very important. So the way that Ma'at is practiced, right? The way that Ma'at is bring into a physical manifestation, the way that Ma'at is actualized, right? Is carried out in the worldview, right? So the world views it as a concept which links the divine, right? The Most High, the Creator, Allah, God, whatever you would like to call that. The natural, so nature, right? The way that things are supposed to naturally take place, right? And then finally, the social. So again, when you think about the social, think about society. Think about how individuals relate to each other and how that relation is structured, right? That's your social, that's your society. So Ma'at is designed to link these three phenomena: the divine, the natural, so God, nature, and society. Ma'at is designed to link those three phenomena together, right? These three domains are interrelated, interactive, and mutually affective. So again, it's not effective, right, but affective with an A. So that has a very distinct definition that's very important. So when you think about affect with an A, it's how something affects you, right? If how the fire affects one's hand, if you put your hand in the fire, you will be burnt. That's the affect of playing with fire, right? Is being burnt. It's vastly different from effect. So they're saying that these three domains are interrelated, so they're connected, interactive, they interact with one another, and mutually affective. And a Ma'atan person understands this and acts accordingly, as the history of the idea of Ma'at, which is presented below, demonstrates. Okay, so this is how this is a way that the three can interact, right? The social, the natural, and the divine. So when a person makes their transition, right? And when I say transition, that just means they die, right? And what the Catholics may understand as like purgatory, so you're waiting to go into heaven or you're waiting to go into hell. You're waiting to go to see where your afterlife is going to be determined. You have to go before Ma'at, right? And let me see if let me explain it first. I'll see if I can find a picture. When you go before Ma'at, she's holding a scale, right? And as if you notice on the images of Ma'at, she always has a feather. Actually, let me try to pull it up for y'all. Give me 1 second.
Wait, so Ma'at's considered like a God-shaped person or a concept?
A little bit of both, right? Little bit of both. So it can be considered like a goddess. So it's definitely always described as woman, but it has a moral principle to it, and I'll show you. Actually, let me move this over here. Okay, so let me make this bigger. So you see here, like the feather on top of her head. So that feather is very significant, and I'll explain to you why. So when a person is going before Ma'at in the afterlife, that feather is set on a scale, and then the individual's heart is set on the scale. Now, Mark, earlier in the conversation, you discussed like the 42 confessions, and that's the other part of the reading that you guys had, right? Kind of reminiscent of the 10 Commandments, right? But what you'll notice, the 10 Commandments will tell you, "Thou shalt not." Right? That's what it says in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not covet my neighbor's wife, right? So it's telling you what not to do. But on the 42 confessions, and this is where the oral history becomes important, right? Because it's a confession, it's something that you're stating. They say, "I have not," and correct me if I'm wrong, most of them are framed in that terminology. "I have not done X, Y, Z," right? So as you're stating these 42 confessions, "I have not killed, I have not committed adultery, I have not," etc., etc., your heart is being weighed against this feather. And if you're able to state these confessions with truth, then you're able to successfully go on to the afterlife, right? If you state these confessions untruthfully, then there's an ambus or this figure that will come, eat your heart, and it'll drag you to the what we may consider hell, right? So you experience a negative afterlife. So that's the application where Ma'at comes in the way that the divine, the social, and the natural begin to connect, right? So the divine and the social connect in the sense that if I'm stating my 42 confessions and I'm able to state those successfully without being dragged into a negative afterlife, then that means in the social, in the way that I interacted with one another and the people in that society was divine. It was ordered by God, right? In the same, if I'm able to state those 42 confessions successfully, then how I interacted with nature was in order, and it was divine. So that way I was able to successfully take myself to the afterlife, right? So this is how Ma'at in real time plays out in the way that the Comedics interacted with each other and interacted with nature, right? So to get back to Mark's point, it served as both, and this goes back to the elasticity of Ma'at, right? It could be many things. She was a goddess, right? She was a moral principle and a code to live by, right? And she also served as like the constitution of Kemetic society, right? There's like 7 core fundamental principles of Ma'at: truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, and propriety, right? So those are like 7 ways you can kind of break down the 42 declarations and try to order your life in that fashion, and you'll be living a life that is considered ma'atic, which will allow you to successfully navigate yourself into the afterlife. The last thing I'll say before we open up the fishbowl, these 42 confessions are literally where Moses got the 10 commandments from, right? So for those who mention they remind me of the 10 commandments, that's because these are the original 10 commandments. These are literally where Moses pulled this information from and created the 10 commandments. For those who study the Old Testament closely, they will tell you that Moses himself was a Kemetic. He was Egyptian, right? So it's not beyond reason that Moses being an Egyptian himself, Moses being Kemetic himself, will be able to derive these 10 commandments from the Kemetic mystery schools, right? It's not beyond reason that genealogy of this information being transferred down, right? So from that point, we'll jump into our fishbowl. Again, you could talk about anything that you found of interest that I've mentioned. You could talk about what was discussed in your breakout groups, or you could talk about what you discussed in your journal, excuse me. So it's totally up to you. Remember, you have 1 time to pass. You have 2 times to do this throughout the semester. Is there anybody who wants to volunteer?
Can I volunteer?
Okay, Claudia, we got you. Anyone else?
I'll volunteer.
I'm sorry, who was that? Victor?
Yeah.
Got you, bro. Any other volunteers?
I'll volunteer.
I'm sorry, who is that?
Isaac.
Isaac, thank you, Isaac. And if there's another volunteer, we'll get one more.
Can I go?
Jenny?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we have Claudia, Victor, Isaac, and Jenny. Again, whatever you guys feel important, go ahead and speak on that. And whoever wants to start, it's on you.
I'll start. What we were saying about the different ways that it was interpreted, I actually have criticism on it. Not in criticism of what it is, but of how people can interpret it, because since it's so broad, how you said that the introduction was about is elasticity and then their boundaries. I actually thought about it in a different sense, is that people can start saying, oh, I'll pick this or I'll ignore this. And they start picking and choosing what they want to follow and what they exclude out. And I feel like that's when, even though there's a lot of ways to interpret it and it has still the main core idea, I feel like people at one point, and then I feel like that happened to the Bible today, because a lot of the text in the Bible isn't there, and it was interpreted like in the 1900s, and then text was changed from different language translations, and some of the meaning was lost. And if you look at different texts from the Bible, let's say more than like in the 1700s, you see the words and terms that aren't used today because they were lost in translation as well. So I feel like there is a point where people start picking and choosing what they want to follow and change to it for their own meaning, to give a different way of lifestyle, but they still consider it in that style, in that society style, if that makes sense.
That's a very good point. So Claudia, if I could just kind of paraphrase, your critique is it's easily to be manipulated, right? You can have a selective relation to what's being said within the terms of ma'at, and you could apply it how you see fit, very similar to the way that the Bible and the Christian religion was manipulated in our more contemporary time. Very good.
Yes.
Next.
I'll go next. I'm not sure which paragraph, but I do remember reading that it said that ma'at evolved over time, that it went from being like working on an individual, like for them, building up their reputation, making good like connections for themselves. It evolved into like building relationships with their families and their communities. Like it wants to strengthen the whole community instead of an individual. And well, that would be their passage or their way into the afterlife, like to have a good one instead of going to what they considered hell.
So since for you, Victor, what I would paraphrase, just Ma'at's evolution into a social force, right? So it started off really focusing on how the individual would behave and perform, right? But then it evolved into focusing on how you relate to the social, how you relate to society, how you relate to your family, et cetera, et cetera. Good point. Next.
So when I read Ma'at, well, to me, Ma'at is someone who can show you a way to go through life by following like sets of rules, which will help you become a better person in life. And it can also help you like push away negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I got out from the readings.
That's a really good point, Isaac, like just how to deal with the negative. And I think that's something that gets lost in our society, right? And even mechanisms that allow you to deal with the negative, we're just now starting to take them seriously, especially in communities of culture, instead of not communities of color, but communities of culture, right? There was a taboo around psychological help. There's a taboo around getting going to see a psychiatrist, going to see a counselor, et cetera, right? But that's just a mechanism to help you deal with the negative. And what Isaac is attentive to is Ma'at was instituted as a mechanism to help you deal with the negative, right? So you wouldn't have to go to a psychologist to help you deal with difficult times in your life, right? Society has kind of built itself in a fashion that gives you an inborn or inbred mechanism to deal with these negativity or these negative issues. Very good point. Jenny?
So something that I found interesting was page 7, the second to last passage.
You know,
And so
You're kind of breaking up, Jenny. It sounds like your mic is muffled or your mic is out. Yeah. Do you want to put it in the chat, or maybe if you grab some headphones, that may give you a better mic? Okay. So while Jenny adjusts her audio, does anybody else want to chime in or comment on their thoughts about the reading or about Ma'at or about what was discussed?
I have a quick thing.
Yeah.
So like I was just reading through the 42
Questions.
statements. I don't know what to call it exactly. But like, so once you die and you go before like Ma'at, is there like a specific number of these that you have to pass? Like, because I'm sure like people have done like some of these things. So like maybe killed. I know that's a like exaggeration, but if you pass every single level, I don't know how you call these like statements,
Confession.
but you two wrong, yeah, one or two wrong, are you still considered like a good person or a bad person, or what is it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mark. So really what it would determine is if you stated enough wrong to where your heart becomes heavier than that feather, then you fucked up, right? Like you're not going to be able to transfer, make your way through. So what it may be, right? You may, okay, well, yeah, I have coveted my neighbor's wife. So it'll knock it down a little bit, but does it make it to where it's outweighing that feather? So it all will determine on how what you say, how what you done acts, with the feather. So you got a little bit of a leeway, but once that leeway makes your heart heavier than that feather, then you're not going to be able to successfully navigate, right? Or if it's like, it senses that you're lying about what you're saying, then automatically you're not going to be able to, your heart is going to be heavier because you're lying, right? Also, the notion that this idea of justice that we have in our system, right? Justice being a woman, justice being blind in the sense that justice is equitable, right? This all is derived from the concept of Ma'at. Even like when you have the I think they call it Lady Liberty, like the image of justice, she's holding the two scales. That is in depiction of what Ma'at did, right? That's their attempts to try to replicate the science and the system of Ma'at. Jenny, are you back with us?
Yeah, does it sound better?
Yeah, it sounds way better, Jenny. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So something that I found interesting is on page 7, the second to last passage. And so basically it discusses the 4 basic areas of Ma'at. So the universal domain, the political domain, the social domain, and the personal domain. And although I was a bit confused at first about what it meant, I kind of related it to my religion and the 4 sections of the Bible in the New Testament that tell different stories. So the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Epistles, and the Book of Revelation. And I thought about how they're both very heavy on the consequences of not following the rules and those principles and the commandments. So yeah, I found that really interesting. And I thought about how both are, well, everything's basically necessary to live in harmony, like the passage says on the fourth statement.
Mm-hmm. Would you guys mind if we kind of take some time and deal with these four areas, these 4 domains? Because I think they're important. It is complex, and I think a lot of the complexity is the other language that kind of is written within that passage, right? It kind of throws you off. But let's get into it. So number 1 is the universal domain. So again, I don't what that language is, I don't know, and I can't pronounce it. So mentally, I'm gonna just not deal with that shit, right? So the universal domain, in which is blank, 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 I don't know, which is the totality of ordered existence and represents things in harmony and in place, right? So the total of ordered existence, right? So how everything in this world, everything in this universe is ordered. Okay, so that's the universal. Number 2, the political domain, which Ma'at is justice and in opposition to injustice, right? So how politics plays out in Ma'atan society, Justice is the focal point, right? And we're opposing anything that is dealing with injustice, right? So that's how politics is played out. So when it comes to the courts, was the act just or was it not? That's going to be the determining factor, right? Not the laws are going to be created by what is just, not about who has the most money, i.e. lobbying, right? Not about who's going to be voted for, what you may call democracy. No, it's ordered by what is just, okay? So that's the political domain. The social domain, in which the focus is on right relations and duty in the context of community. So the way that their society is ordered, right? That's the social. It's the focus is on right relations. So again, think back to last week's reading, right? The teachings of Ptah-hotep. And I mentioned that this is a text really about relation, right? So in the 4 domains of Ma'at, domain number 3, the social, comes back to this idea of relation. How does one another interact and relate to one another, right? How do you treat your brother? How do you treat your sister? That's the relation. So that is what the social is concerned with. And then number 4, the personal. And this kind of goes back to, I believe it was, who was it? Victor was talking about how Ma'at evolved, right? How it starts off being something just for the individual, how I order my individual life, but it is shaped into a broader context, focusing on how society was ordered, right? But if you go back to number 4, the personal domain, in which the following the rules and principles of Ma'at is to realize correctly the universal order in oneself, to live in harmony with the ordered whole, right? So number 4 and number 1, they intersect, right? Because number 1 is about the universal, right? The universal being ordered in such a fashion that's divine, right? But number 4 is about how the personal interacts with the universal. How, and that's encompassing of the social, the nature, and all that is in that is within the universe, right? So those are the 4 basic areas or the 4 domains of Ma'at, right? And how it's to be understood. Jenny, did that support what you thought about that domain? Did it give you more clarification? How did that reading of the 4 domains interact with your understanding of the 4 domains?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of found it to be very familiar. The way that the Book of Revelation in specific is very it points out how you basically have to like follow the commandments and be a good person, and just I guess it's very similar to the 4th statement that's about
Personal.
yeah, the personal one that's about like also being a good person in order to live in harmony. So I guess I just found that to be very similar. Yeah, similar.
Yeah. So that would be like, so if we're thinking about the journals, right? That's how Jenny made her analysis. That's how she made sense of what she read, was by comparing it to Revelations, right? That's how her analysis came into play for her. So that is our fishbowl. Again, I hope it wasn't too stressful for those who participated. It didn't seem like it, but let's open the conversation up to the larger group. I'm curious, what was your process reading? What was the affect of the reading, right? Was it too dense for you? Was it too hard to understand? Let's just start the conversation with that. Preferably someone who we have not heard from yet.
I'll go.
Okay.
I would say it wasn't hard to understand. Well, in the beginning, I did find it a little bit difficult to like keep up with it, I guess.
Yeah.
But once I got the hang of it and once I understood what, especially in page 8 and 10, what I understood what Mat was, I found it easier to understand the whole text.
Yeah. So Yasmin brings up a good point, right? Like, let me try to have the best way. So like, for those who listen to hip hop music, who listen to rap music, right? You kind of have to pick up the rapper's flow to really understand it, right? So like, you're not gonna, on first listen, understand everything that Kendrick's talking about until you really understand how Kendrick processes his rhymes, how he goes about creating those rhymes, right? It's no different with writers, right? There's a rhythm to the way things are written as well. One of my favorite thinkers, contemporary thinkers right now, is a cat by the name of Fred Moten. It's some of the most confusing shit I've ever read, but it's my favorite because once you read it for about an hour, it starts to make sense because you're understanding his rhythm, right? So to me, the process of reading is very rhythmic. And that's why I advocate for reading stuff out loud, because it allows you to hear the rhythm. The spacing in between certain words are important, right? The placing of commas become important. And when you read out loud, you understand that spacing, that punctuation, that word placement a little bit more, because you have to read into those punctuations, right? So to me, what Yasmin is mentioning is the rhythm of the text, right? At first, she didn't really get the rhythm, but as she kind of got through the text a little bit more, she found the beat. And I think that's an important method to the process of reading. Who else? Who else wants to share their affective experience with the text? And again, there's no wrong answer. Something simple as, yeah, I had to look a lot of shit up. I have this question, whatever, anything.
Something I found like hard to understand through the text is that the author, whoever was, kept referencing other authors, and then also like the different languages as well. Like it kind of, I was trying to read as best as I can, trying to interpret it, but like it was pretty hard because he brings up like different languages, and to, I guess, to catch up with his, like he said, to catch up with his flow, his rhythm and flow. At first it was kind of hard, but I guess towards the end I got it better. But
yeah,
still hard.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. And to me, that citation style, it breaks the flow, because instead of the rhythm continuing, you pause the rhythm to insert an author's name, the year, and the page number, right? So for me, I like Chicago style, because you would just write it out and put like a little number, like a small number one, and it doesn't break up the flow of the reading. A very good point. Let's get some other ideas, preferably from someone we have not heard from. Was there anybody who this was just too difficult for? You didn't understand none of this shit. You was completely lost. That's okay too. I would like to hear your thoughts though. So Gabriella.
Yeah, low key, I was really lost on like the reading and all that. So I'm just basically listening to like what everybody's saying.
Okay.
Kind of better understand.
Okay. So although you were lost, what did the reading leave you feeling? Right? Like, did you more lost? Right? There was a specific question that you had? Was it the terminology that had you lost? Like, if you kind of give us a little bit more than that.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, it's because I'm driving, so like the signal's bad in this neighborhood.
Yeah, it's all good. I was saying, if you could kind of specify what caused you to be lost, was it the terminology, right? The words that were being used were too difficult to understand. The style of the writing was confusing. The subject matter was confusing. What do you think made you the most confused?
Honestly, I don't know if this will make sense, but like the way that they phrase things, like the way they speak, like it kind of just throws me off, because it's not like normal like language that I'm used to.
Yeah.
So like it just feels like different. So that kind of threw me off.
Yeah, philosophy writing is weird, man. I'm just call it what it is, right? Like it's almost like a different language. Another thing with philosophy writing is to understand, locate, and find the argument, right? So think about your journals, right? The first portion is the thesis. What is the problem the author is trying to address, right? That's the author's argument. Oftentimes it's difficult to find in philosophic writings, because you have to find out whether it's an argument or a counter argument, right? And does everybody know what a counter argument is? Does anybody not know what a counter argument is? Let me ask it that way. Who does not know what a counter argument is? Okay, so you have to be able to determine, what's the argument and what's the counter argument. One of the things that helps you with the counter argument are terms like however, right? So, whatever they said prior to that, hearing that, however was coming after that, however, is going to counter what they said prior to the however. Does that make sense? So for how that may play out. Some people may have believed that 45 was the best president in this country. He was able to fortify the economic base of the country. However, some scholars argue that he was divisive and he upped racial relations. So you see how prior to me saying whatever, however, it supports the way that 45 was in office, but after however, it starts to critique and challenge the way that 45 was in office. So being attentive to little things like that allows you to pick up the shifts in philosophical text. Who else? Who else wants to just share their comments or concerns on the reading? So Gabriella, what were your thoughts on the reading?
I thought it was pretty similar to our first reading. As far as like morality, I would say the only difference was it didn't go so much into like how to treat those above you and below you, is more as though like basically like the 10 commandments, what you should and shouldn't do.
So what do you guys think about, because you're absolutely right in the comparison between the 10 commandments and this text. What do you think is the significance of the subtle difference between the confessions of Ma'at and the 10 commandments in the sense of, right? One being articulated as thou shall not. So the 10 commandments telling me what you should not do. And then Ma'at being phrased in I have not, right? What do you think the significance or the importance of that is?
Can I answer that? Is like Gabriel?
Yeah, go for it.
I feel like, I guess it's like in simple, it's like the past and the in the future. Like the 10 Commandments was like thou shalt not. That's like talking more in the future sense that you would not do it in the future or in your nearest future or farthest future. But the Ma'at is talking like in the past tense. So like I did not, like I have not. So like once you already die, you go before like Ma'at. It's more of what you did in life, but the 10 Commandments is like what you're going to do in life.
Absolutely. It's a great call out, Mark. Anybody else want to chime in? The difference between the statement of thou shall not and I have not.
I don't know if I'm going off too different from it, but I think it's more of a, from the 10 Commandments, it's like, okay, if we go somewhere else and someone likes what we're doing, they could like maybe join us, rather than what the confessions is more of like, okay, if you didn't start from it, then maybe it's only like a R system thing. Like if you're from here, that's what you do. And if you're not, it's whatever pretty much.
Okay, so and let me know, Jasper, if I'm putting words into your mouth, but what I think you're saying is very profound, right? So the 10 commandments could be interpreted in from a space of conquest, right? What do I mean by that? In the sense that you could take these 10 commandments, right? And we're gonna go from America to South America, and we're gonna institute or enforce these 10 commandments on South Africa, or South America, right? That's how a way that the 10 commandments can function, right? I'm commanding you to behave in a certain way, right? Juxtaposed to the 42 confessions of Ma'at, where it's something that's inbred into the society, right? You've already lived your life, so you would have to be aware of these confessions to be able to confess these confessions in the afterlife, right? So it's something more so for members of a community juxtaposed to those from outside that community who are being met up with, right? Or being introduced to, right? So am I kind of saying what you're saying correctly, Jasper?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And also think about what it means to command, right? The difference between a commandment and a confession, right? These are called the 10 commandments. I'm telling you what to do from an authority figure, i.e. God or whatever you want to call that individual, right? But a confession is about what you have done, right? You're speaking to the higher power about your behavior, about your attributes, your contributions to the world, right? So even within there, you can see the subtle differences, right? When you command, anyone could supersede or stand in the place of God, right? You could be anybody who's a position of power could be the one commanding. But when you're confessing, you're not in that position of power, right? You're confessing to the authority figure. You're confessing to the power to have your lifestyle be validated or authenticated by a successful transition into the afterlife. That's a very good point, Jasper. About 10 more minutes. Anyone else want to chime in? Preferably someone we have not heard from. If not, I'll call on you. It's up to y'all. Carla, what were your thoughts on the reading?
Honestly, I thought it was just a little harder to read just because it isn't like my language or the type of like modern English that I usually like read, you know? Like, do you get me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely, and that's why I tried to give you guys a heads up, right? Like, it's going to take some time. It's not going to be an easy read. And some of the texts throughout the semester are going to be like that. Like, I'm just call it what it is, right? But it's part of my job is to stretch you intellectually, right? It's like intellectual yoga. I'm going to try to get you to reach parts of your mind that you haven't tapped into before. Because I believe that you guys have the ability to kind of go there, right? Let me ask, for those who felt confused while reading it, how did the conversation, did it provide any clarity to what was read? Do you feel just as confused? Is it not as much confused? Do you feel like you understood what Karanga was arguing? For those who were confused. So I just spoke to two people who mentioned that they were confused. That doesn't mean that they're the only two people who were confused. But if you felt that you were confused while reading this, we've discussed the reading, we discussed the material. How did that process impact your confusion? Do you feel more confused? Do you feel less confused? Did it help? Did it not help? Talk back
It
out.
sort of helped me get more about the top or like understand the topic a little better.
What is there any points specifically that helped you understand a little bit more? Carla, was there any specific point that was illuminated for you more than another?
Yeah, just overall, like the whole text. Like, because when you describe some things, I was just like, oh, okay, that's what that was meant to say, you know? Yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Good. Okay, let me see. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna find out what our next reading is. Ernesto, let's see. It helped me hear everyone's views. I understand the way we can say it. Yeah, and I think that's part of just responding to what's said in the chat, right? I think to me it's more valuable. Like, one, I can come up here and tell you guys what I thought about the reading, but being able to communicate with one another and glean understanding from one another, to me, is really where this process should really kind of take form and shape at. Hence why I allow you guys to, go into those breakout rooms first, so that way you can kind of exchange ideas, engage in discourse and discuss and dialogue, which you've engaged and read. Let me see what our next reading is, and we'll discuss that for a little bit before we break out. 1 second. Okay, share my screen real quick. So I think we're gonna do Glissant, Poetics of Elation, next. So it's not long, okay? But it's a poetic, so it's not gonna be as clear as one would want it to be, right? You gotta kind of be imaginative because it's poetry. We're going to read this and Ngugi as well. So these two will be due for our next week's discussion. Glissant, Poetics of Relation, and Ngugi, Decolonizing the Mind. So those will be the two readings for next week. Glissant, Poetics of Relation, and Ngugi, Decolonizing the Mind. So if we were to think about the, just like the genealogy of the course, right? We started off on the continent of Africa. We're currently on the continent of Africa discussing Kemetic culture, right? We discussed a little bit how European invasion came into Kemet and pushed the information along with the people west into West Africa. They took the knowledge and those wisdoms with them to West Africa. What we'll engage now is the interruption, right? The enslavement being injected into the African evolutionary process, right? So we'll engage this idea of the open boat, right? And this is just the boats, what Glissant is talking about is the boats that we are forced into that took us to the Western Hemisphere. And then we get into this idea of language, right? And language being tools of colonization, right? Think about it this way. The three vestiges, and when I say vestiges, that just means lasting effects, right? The three vestiges of enslavement for African people are our names, our language, and our religions, right? So again, the three vestiges of enslavement, and I say African people, but it will be the same for indigenous people, right? The names, the language, and your religion. So prior to enslavement, African people had certain names, right? After enslavement, you took on the name of the individual who your family's plantation was working for, right? So Dwayne's last name is Davis. So if we were to trace his last name and his family's genealogy back, there would be somebody who in his family lineage who worked on a plantation whose the owner's name was Davis, right? Jasper's last name is Graham. If we were to trace his lineage back, there will be some point in his history where there was one of his ancestors who worked on a plantation for an individual whose last name was Graham, right? My last name by birth is Davies, right? That's the name of my parents. If I were to trace my lineage back, there would be a point in my history where I'll find some ancestor who was working for an individual whose last name was Davies, right? So you carry the last name of the individual whose plantation you worked on. So that's the vestige of slavery for Black folks in the sense of our last name, right? Religion, right? African people had a certain religion. We are discussing these religions for the past 2 weeks, right? The concept of Ma'at is part of the African spiritual tradition, right? These were the things that we were believing in. We were introduced to Europeans through enslavement, and then we all became Christians or we all became Muslims, right? So religion being a lasting vestige of enslavement, right? So your name, your religion, and then your language, right? So African people were speaking African languages prior to the contact with Europeans. After that contact, we all came out speaking English, speaking French, speaking Spanish, right? So that's a vestige of enslavement through our language. Indigenous folks is no different, right? You guys had indigenous last names and you came out with Hernandez and all these Spanish names, right? As part of the colonization process. You had indigenous spiritual traditions, right? After you come into contact with Europeans, you came out Catholic and Christian, right? It's part of the colonial process. Same with your language. You had your own native languages. After contact with Europeans, you all come out speaking Spanish, right? That's a colonial language. So this notion of language, we'll get to in the reading dealing with Ngugi. He's talking about decolonizing the mind as it pertains to language. And then this notion of the open boat, which is the mechanism that we were used to travel across the Atlantic to get to the Western Hemisphere. We'll engage that notion through the work of Glissant. Is there any questions you guys have for me? I will post the extra credit opportunity for tomorrow on the Google Classroom site, and I'll also send that out to you guys via email. Other than that, you guys have a good week. Be safe, be well, and I will catch you guys next Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.